In terms of political parallels between Alchemised and current events, because this book is very recent, it only came out a few months ago, there were a few things that came to mind. The most obvious ones felt to me like parallels between the wars that are going on, because it is a book about war, and one of the main conclusions of the book, I think possibly the main theme of the book as such, is that suffering is not something to be sought. It's not something that makes you a better person necessarily. You can learn lessons from the causes of suffering. But suffering as such, it is not true that suffering makes you noble or it makes you pure or it makes you worthy of something. This is, both sides kind of say this. The religious side say that suffering is a test from the gods and that we have to go through suffering in order to be pure. And the necromancer says, well, if you can withstand certain things, if you are tough enough, right, to deal with being experimented on or to deal with being killed and brought back to life, basically, then you are worthy. Only the unworthy die is one of their slogans in the necromancer side. So there are like justifications for suffering on both sides, which you kind of understand because it is a war and there's a lot of suffering in a war and they need people to keep fighting. But at the end of the day, and this is where the main character being a healer is really important because she is seeing everyone who gets wounded all of the time. And so when something is going well for her side in the war, she doesn't even feel it because all she sees is the wounded. And it does not matter, even if they won the battle, there are still tons of wounded. And so my first thought when I was reading this and trying to see, like, is she trying to comment on something going on today, something political? And I do not know if this is the case. I have not researched her motives or anything, or if this was a deliberate, but my first thought was Israel-Gaza. That she is trying to say that even though one side might be better than the other, war is still hell, war is still suffering, and we need to be very aware that we are not glorifying either side, which, Hamas does. They try to glorify suffering and martyrdom as being serving God or what have you, and I don't know if there's a comparable claim made on the Israeli side, but we need to be very careful that we are not glorifying something that is in fact just bad and tragic. And we need to keep in mind, I don't know if she would use the term the human cost, but the fact that there's not a higher purpose to being in pain. It is just pain. And we need to be looking for ways to end that, and we need to be looking for the root causes of that. And that's where the other lesson of the book comes in, I think, which is the more we try to suppress something, especially something that is natural and part of our natures, the more we are going to put ourselves in situations where we end up suffering or we end up in conflict. And that, I'm minded, maybe just because I already had the Israel-Gaza comparison in, I'm thinking about Islam and how there are many countries where women are suppressed and they're treated as inherently guilty because they are women, right? This has a long tradition, but we often talk about the practical results of that, of how women have to wear certain clothes and they cannot do certain things. Maybe they cannot work or they cannot drive or they cannot go in public on their own, depending on where we are talking about, right? And all of that is horrible, and we see the effect that it has on their lives, but where does it come from? And it comes from the belief that women are inherently more sinful or inherently a temptation or inherently something outside of their control because of how they are born. And so the parallel in Alchemized is vivimancers are suppressed under the religious order. They are not allowed to practice their vivimancy, or if they are, only in very specific controlled situations. And they're not allowed to have kids either. So the main character is sterilized because she's a vivimancer. And this leads to all kinds of people going to the necromancer's side because they want to research vivimancy. The vivimancers don't want to be suppressed. They don't want to have their lives controlled. They want to be able to use their powers. But when they're using them with the necromancer, they're using them to torture people and to experiment on people without their consent. So it ends up being that a whole bunch of people, because they don't want their lives controlled, go to the side where their lives are not being controlled and end up doing really terrible things, which they would never have done if their natures had been respected, if the fact of who they are had been respected, and if they had been able to make their own choices. So I don't know if SenLinYu had any of that in mind when she wrote it, but it is what it puts me in mind of, because the lessons are the same. We have to respect the fact that guilt cannot be based on something that you have no control over, if it's to mean anything. And if you try to give somebody guilt for something that they did not choose, then it has these devastating psychological effects, but it can also have political and cultural effects.